For this assignment, obviously you're going to be using audio. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to adjust some of the audio levels, as well as cut out some ums and ahs that you might encounter. Remember, you can't change the answer that the person gives, but you can shorten it if you need to shorten it to help with flow or to match up your B-roll, but you cannot change the content or what their answer is saying. So I'm going to go ahead and find some footage. Unfortunately, most of my hard drives are packed, or I can't locate them at the moment. So this is going to be some really old footage that a student shot several years ago on a tape. So the quality is definitely going to be a lot different. I have a answer that to a question that she asked, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an in and an out point like we talked about before. You want to make sure that you don't have your questions in your piece. So I always recommend laying the interview SOTs first and then going after your B-roll. And remember, you don't want to edit your audio levels until after your picture is locked. So that way you're not wasting time editing audio that you might not use in the future. However, if your audio is bad and you're not quite sure if it's going to actually work, you might want to consider maybe editing one clip and seeing if it's savable. If it's not, then obviously you're not going to be able to use that portion of your interview. So let's listen to what she's saying. And an out point. So now I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this to the timeline. Remember, the first clip you drag and drop to the timeline or your sequence will format the sequence based on what the clip is. So now you can see that her audio levels are here. Now remember, you do want your audio levels of your SOTs, which is sound on tape from your person, so your answers need to be between the -6 and -12 dB range. So that means that you're going to have your B-roll audio, that sound lower, or if you do music, you're going to have that sound lower as well. So one thing you can do is if you turn on wrench, if you click on the wrench, you can say show audio waveforms if you don't have the audio waveforms, which are right here. And you can also expand the tracks in case you want to see them a little bit easier or bigger. And when you're here, if you do need to ever cut out some ums and ahs, we do have the razor blade tool. And say this was an or an ah, I could cut that out, use my move arrow, click on it, hit delete, control click or right click if you have a right clickable mouse, and say ripple delete, and now it's edited the out. And you always want to check before the edit you made and after the edit you made. Now, unfortunately, mine is going to sound very odd because I could probably cut out a normal word for her, but you always want to go back and check it to make sure you didn't cut too close to the audio waveform. So I'm going to go Command-Z to go back and reattach that. Now, sometimes if you do cut too close to the audio waveform, you are going to hear a little bit of a pop. Here we go. Let's see if we can get a pop. Do you hear that pop at the end? So you want to make sure that you avoid cutting too close to the audio waveform. If you do need to fade something out, you can always use the pen tool. And you can press P for pen, or come over here in your tool palette and get your pen tool. If you click on your pen tool, then you can go to this little line that you see here, and you can actually fade things out by adding a keyframe. If you just need to adjust all the levels because the levels are too low, which we can see they are too low because they're in the -24 and -30 range, you can actually just click on the line with your move or selection arrow selected, and you can just pull up. Now, even though it says 2.54 dB, that's not necessarily meaning it's going to take it up to 2.54 dB. It's going to raise it. So we're going to increase it as loud as we can. And we're still only getting into the 24 and 18. So you can see it's very important that you do pay attention to your audio levels while you're out shooting, because if you don't, then you're going to have some issues when it comes to editing, and you're going to spend more time editing. Now, one thing you can do is if you actually right-click on the audio, you can actually adjust the audio gain. You can come here and say audio gain, and I can ask it to adjust it by another 8 dB. And I'm going to press OK. Now you can see the waveforms even increased. And now let's see if we're out of the -30 to -24 range.
Some awareness and spark curiosity to go do research for themselves.
So we're anywhere between the -24 and -12 dB range. Really, we want to be between the -6 and -12, so you could probably increase it a little bit more. Now that you've increased your audio by adjusting this line right here, the audio levels, but also by control clicking or right clicking and adjusting the audio gain, now what we can do is we can create custom fades. So you can fade things out by using the pen tool. And if you click on the line and then you click again, now you have 2 points or keyframes. What these keyframes mean is it tells the software that at this point you want something to happen. To adjust the keyframe, you want to make sure you have your move or selection arrow selected. And then if I need to fade out at the end, I can just click on the keyframe and pull it down, and now I have a fade, and I can check it. So you want to get in the habit of every time you make an edit to go back and check before the edit and after the edit to make sure it flows seamlessly and that it sounds good.
Do research for themselves.
You can also use transitions that are pre-made by the software. I personally like to use the pen tool and fade things out whenever I want and how fast I want. However, you can also go to the Effects tab or Effects workspace, click on it, and then you can actually adjust, and you can see that there's audio effects, audio transitions, and audio transitions is where you can go to get a crossfade, which is everyone's favorite. Another thing you can do if you did need a fade is if you right click, you can go to Apply Default Transition. Now generally the default transition is going to be a crossfade unless you've changed it on your computer. And now you can see it has a fade, so it's going to fade.
We were just hoping to erase.
So that's just an option for you. But I personally like to use the pen tool because it gives you a lot more control and more precision as opposed to using just a template. Now remember, if you do cut up somebody's ums and ahs, like say you've cut up some of their answer to get rid of some of the unnecessary pauses or ums and ahs, you are going to then have a jump cut, and you're going to have to make sure you cover that up with your B-roll, because otherwise we're going to see the jump cut in the video.
Some awareness, curiosity to go.
You can see how her mouth jumped because we have a cut there. So if you ever have a cut there, you're just going to want to put your B-roll over it. So if we go back to our editing mode, I can then find some B-roll, and generally you want the B-roll to match, so it's good to maybe find her in the B-roll, or you can look for something that is pertinent to what she's talking about. So I can go and find some B-roll of young people maybe, and I can put some in and out points. Again, her listening is probably not great, so it might be better to actually start my end point when she's talking as opposed to just listening. And then I'll put an out point. And then I can go ahead and I can use the B-roll here to kind of cover up this cut. So not only do you have to think about cutting up, your answer so it works with the flow that you have, it also wants to go with the B-roll that you have. So you do have some options. You can, drag your B-roll down here, and then you're going to notice that I am going to have some issues. It's trying to go over the audio, and that's because this is where I need to, I don't remember what I was saying. Ooh. So after you create your in and out points for your B-roll, you're going to want to cover up that little bit of that edit or that issue that you had when you cut out some ums and ahs, So what we're going to do then is we're going to click, hold, and drag our video here. Make sure it does not squish onto and adjust our audio of our other clip. But we're going to then also have to be sure that we can still hear the person giving the answer over the gnat sound that we have.
Awareness, curiosity to go do research. I'm sorry. One more thing.
So now you hear that they're competing with each other, kind of like some of the examples we may have seen in class. So what you're going to need to do then is, again, you're going to make sure to get your move or selection arrow, drag the volume bar down. Let me expand my track so it's easier to grab and for you to see. So we can go down. And I can drag this bar down to lower the audio. So you want to make sure that if you have a stereo pair, it should adjust together. If not, you're just going to want to double check that. But now that I've lowered the audio, I need to make sure that it's low enough. If it isn't, then I'm just going to lower it more, because we want to make sure that the answer is more present than the B-roll at this point.
Curiosity to go do research for themselves.
So going to need to drop it down more. And in certain situations where you have people talking, it's not going to be really working out often good for gnat sound. So it's going to be a little bit difficult. You're going to have to kind of really play around with those levels. You might have to adjust it. So if I go down that far into the infinity, then there's going to be no real audio. So you can see it only adjusted one. So I'm going to click on this one and then bring it down as well. Again, we don't want to go down into the infinity, because that means that you're not going to be able to hear it. So we need to make sure that we can still hear the answer, but still hear a little bit of that gnat sound.
It's curiosity to go do research for themselves. One more thing.
And then maybe part of this girl's statement works well, then you can also use the pen tool to then click and fade it up. You do have to have, again, 2 points when you're using the pen tool. Otherwise, you are just going to be adjusting the whole line if you just have 1 point. So now I'll move my move or selection arrow and I'll push up. And then now maybe I'm taking the gnat sound louder, so that way people can kind of hear what she's saying, if it flows well and it works for my story.
Awareness, curiosity to go do research for themselves. One more thing.
Now, the thing that makes it kind of confusing is you're hearing one person talk and you're seeing one woman here at the microphone talking, and the lips aren't matching up, which is kind of peculiar. So you want to be present when you're picking your B-roll and make sure that you're not using something that might be confusing. So maybe you actually have a different clip there. Maybe it's people listening to the people talking, or you have a man conversing with someone, so you can kind of tell. But another reason why your viewer should know that it's not her talking is we just saw who's talking, and then we have some B-roll. And another way you could do that is make sure that maybe you have another shot here, like a couple different shots, since she's talking about, people coming. It's not just one person, it's multiple people. So those are some audio basics, and we might get into a little bit more throughout the semester.